Hello, welcome to the meeting tent, an ongoing series on the work of Stan Tenen. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our usual cast of characters: Michael Andron, Daniel Gill, Lavana Tenen, and unfortunately Adele Packer couldn't be here today, so we'll just push on without her. So we're going to continue our poster series. We've done 2 episodes. We're going to continue on that, and we're going to bring up something that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about, but it was intrinsic in Stan's work. It was probably the basic of his work, and that is geometric metaphor. It's a difficult topic to explore, but we're going to do it with a poster. I just wanted to before we go into it, just want to mention we've talked a lot about metaphors. Lavana and I've, and Lavana has written some stuff on metaphor and what it is and how it's part of our life, our everyday life. We don't even think about it. We live by metaphor, and basically, just a definition of metaphor is it basically equals 2 things, not because they are the same, but for the sake of comparison. It's not the same as a simile, which is usually we use something as like or as a simile. Typical, there are thousands of metaphors that we use in our life. I could eat a horse. It's no skin off my nose. He wears his heart on his sleeve, things like that. And it's used in advertising. It's used in every element of our communication. Now, the thing about metaphor, let me just say this, is that it's culturally limited. So a metaphor for those of us, even English-speaking people in America, would not be the same in, say, England or any other language. And there's the rub. So people who come to this country and we say an expression and they could be offended by our use of a specific metaphor. And that's where geometric metaphor comes in, because geometric metaphor is based on a mathematical model. And so that element is taken out of it. It's based on universal principles. Yeah, Lavana, you had a comment.
Okay, 2 things. Interesting that you would open this way because the examples that you gave, personally, I would call more culturally based idioms. And you're absolutely correct. Those are they're culturally identified, and anyone who has tried to speak clearly with someone whose native language is not your own, you realize very quickly that you need to be able to spot those idioms when you use them and translate them into precisely what you mean, because the cultural idioms would be different. What Stanley was always thinking of, and what I tend to think of in terms of metaphor, is you have a particular idea that you want to convey, and there is some somewhat more common object, thought, process, whatever, that more people are familiar with, that has certain qualities that are in common with the idea that you want to convey. But metaphors are never exact. You're right about that. Metaphors, you're not choosing them to be exact. You're choosing them to offer a particular way of accessing the qualities that you want to convey about the thing you actually have in mind, that are similar to something that people already know. The advantage, and what Stanley was dealing with in terms of using geometry as a metaphor, is, you're correct, it's universal in that, if you think about it, as we've discussed before, we all live within geometry. I mean, if you think of geometry as being the physical relationship of things to other things, we live within a 3-dimensional world. And so taking the simplest elements of geometry, which is what he's dealing with, certainly in this poster. Um, the what he came to call the inverted T triangle, which we've discussed before, and using that to show the relationship between ideas that are well, for example, okay, this particular
Well,
poster.
let's wait till we get the poster on the
Okay,
screen.
okay,
The
sorry.
only thing I just want to say is that this is somewhat unique for Stan's in terms of Stan's work. If you Google geometric metaphor, I think it's the third article of Stan Tenen. There's not a lot of work on this, and that perhaps is why it was difficult for Stan to get support because it was a concept that is not in our vernacular. And so that's why when we look at this, we are going to try and extract what Stan's thinking was, if such a thing is possible. So let me put this poster up on the screen. Okay, so this was a poster, and fortunately there are notes to go along with the poster that we can refer to. Gan Eden in geometric metaphor, the geometry of linear and cyclic time. Gan Eden is the Garden of Eden, so a lot of Stan's metaphors and work on geometric metaphor come from biblical passages, among other things, mostly in rabbinic studies. And let's just take a look at this visually and just kind of take it in. We're looking, the thing that stands out the most is what Levana was referring to, the inverted T shown as a triangle, which is basically the inverted T in 2 dimensions. There's a lot of duality here. If you look at the title, it says the geometry of linear and cyclic time, the unification of the tree of life and the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden. So if you are familiar with this part of the Bible or the Torah, we've heard of the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. And I'm not as familiar as I should be with this passage, but are those basically the same things? Go ahead, Levana.
Okay, well, actually, they're not. And this poster and these ideas pretty much flowed from him thinking about a particular, let's see, where are we? A particular passage of, okay, well, okay, there is a thing about the fact that there are 2 trees in the garden. One is the tree of life and one is the tree of knowledge. And they are referred to as both, each of them is referred to as being in the center of the garden. And so the question arises, how can 2 different trees be both in the center of the garden? And there's a lot of discussion about this in Talmudic literature, and I had the quote before me and I have lost it, but it doesn't really pertain. And so Stanley was thinking about this, and then he suddenly realized, well, okay, we're also talking about the nature of time and the nature of how we perceive time. The idea being that we perceive time we perceive the passage of time in 2 different ways. One of which is cyclic, as in the return of the seasons, as in the way that the stars, return season after season, the cycles of life. And in terms of the inverted T triangle, we have always regarded the horizontal line as reflecting what goes around comes around. The wheel of karma, the cycles of life, nature, and associated that with the 5-letter name Elohim in traditional literature is also associated with, as God as it pertains to manifestation in nature. And then there's the vertical line and the other way in which we perceive time, which is linear, birth to death. The unidirectional progression of our lives, which is not cyclic. It has a beginning, it has an end, and it goes in this one singular direction. Well, okay. The vertical line corresponds to that. The vertical line in terms of the way the inverted T metaphor works. Okay, here you've got this repeating cycle of what goes around comes around. But on the other hand, there's also the possibility of novelty coming into our lives, things that we haven't thought of. And as a metaphor for the life energy that continually flows into our reality, keeping us going, that is the vertical line. So all of this poster is the expansion of his thoughts on how the two different ways that we perceive time, if you consider the tree or trees as being these two sticks, another translation of the word that also means tree, then you can have both of these ideas as being part of the same structure in the center of the garden. So that answered his question about all of the, Talmudic discussion of this idea. But then something that we discovered somewhat later from his work on this poster was some research which got published in 2018 dealing with specifically how the brain processes projecting forward in time. And there is scientific research published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which shows that two different parts of our brain are involved in the different ways in which we anticipate actions in time. There's the cyclic actions, like we can anticipate what's happening next summer, or we can anticipate the existence of summer. And then there is how we project time into the future. Whether it's sports, music, speech, or even allocating attention, the researchers' study suggests that timing is not a unified process, but there are two different ways in which we make temporal predictions, and these depend on two different parts of the brain. So that just fit really nicely with this idea of both linear and cyclic time, and that this is something is the differences and the way we use both is kind of wired into our physical body. That's how we organize our perceptions of the reality that we live in.
And it goes back to the duality that's been the underlying principle of all the work represented in the letter Beit, inside and outside, and the many other complementary yet diverse factors. I want to read some of the notes. And by the way, if anybody wants this poster, would like to get a copy emailed to them, I'll put the email address up on the screen. It's the poster and the notes that go with it. Just email me in the subject line, just put Eden, Eden poster. That's all you need to do. And I'll put that up on the screen. So here are the notes that Stan wrote for this poster. Now you notice that everything is labeled. This is A, this box that we're looking at here. And his notes on A are, here we see the golden rule inverted T triangle extending from mind to world. The root ayin dalet or ayin vav dalet refers to instances, times, and the final nun tells us that they continue. Ayin's original pictogram is a circle, the eye, and a spectrum and the field of view. Dalet, meaning door or triangle, opens the door that connects linear progressive time and cyclic time. Ayin Dalet Nun, Eden, can mean time and time again. Arya Kaplan in the Sefer Yetzirah notes that the expression Ade Ad, Ayin Dalet Yad, Ayin Dalet, used many times in the Bible, means until eternity of etem? Is that
Eternities.
Oh, eternities. Yeah, look like an M there. Yeah, until eternities of eternities. The geometry of the inverted T golden rule triangle suggests the geometry of a sundial, which marks off cyclic time. It also suggests the geometry of a pendulum metronome, which counts out linear time. The triangle is the garden. The blue vertical line becomes the tree of life. The red horizontal line becomes the tree of knowledge, extending from left to right, from negative to positive, covering all polarities as radii of the circle of the earth plane. Michael or Daniel, is there something that, do you see anything here that is like instinctive or that stands out? Or is this kind of literally Greek that we're looking at? Because that's how it can appear to people when they first look at this.
If you, to use a metaphor, the vertical line, the garden, is the human body, and the soul is the line coming into the body, and it manifests in different ways, sometimes hidden, sometimes clear and overt. But that is a fundamentally Jewish. I mean, it doesn't mean it's not fundamental to other wisdom schools and traditions, but it is certainly fundamental to Jewish thinking that we are a multi-leveled creature, and our connection, our umbilical cord, if you will, kind of shown on the lower right part of what's on the screen now, in the triangle of the tree stick. That umbilical cord is tying us to our soul, which in turn is tied to God. And that's an influx that's happening all the time. We're just too dense or stubborn or deaf to hear it and see it. So we don't. But that seems like a pretty universal idea. They may use different words or different levels of souls and so on. But the notion of that is certainly way before the Greeks. To use your question, is it all Greek? It's all very basic to the Hebrew. I just want to add one thing, and then and we can go on, and that is that the existence of the two trees, which are both in the center, is very significant, because I heard one rabbi describe it not as the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but rather the tree of living and the tree of knowing, putting it in a verb form, that our very existence, our very, the life force that makes us alive, was supposed to come first. God didn't say, don't ever eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's just get yourself grounded in the wisdom of the tree of life. From a Jewish perspective, can I share the screen for 1 second?
Yeah.
Can you pull that down for 1 second? Because as you were talking, I went and found an image of this.
Right.
If
Yeah.
you imagine that vertical line, we see it as a single line, like somebody took a pen and drew down a line. But if you imagine that that's just our eyes and we kind of spread it out a little bit, the same way that a thin DNA strand fits into every nucleus of every cell. But if we open it up, we see all kinds of stuff going on. Well, this is what is known as the tree of life in Kabbalistic thought. And it's got the 10 sphirot plus this extra one dot that explain how we get from the whole world down to this world, how we get from the Aleph to the world of Bet, from singularity to multiplicity. But the Chinese have a diagram that is known as the Taiji De. That's their metaphor for the existence and creation. The same meaning. The yogis have the same thing with chakras. Here, you have string theory from quantum physics, which normally would be inside of a proton, and here is elongated into a line. But the point I'm making is mystics in every religion, every wisdom school had some version of that. There's even a drawing like this from Native Americans on the side of a mountain in Nevada, where you can see the exact same picture. And so let me get back to you guys. There we are. My point is that we defined that metaphor perhaps earlier than a lot of those systems. So those who followed us copied from us. Those who preceded us, maybe we got it from them, or maybe they were all seeing the same thing. The quantum physicist was not looking for a tree of life. They were looking for DNA. And they were looking for what's inside the atom and then what's inside the proton. And every proton of every atom of every one of the trillions of cells in our body or particles in our body has that inside of it. And it's affected by extremely low frequency magnetic fields from the scientific point of view. So somehow this was seen by seers. Kind of interesting that the word starts with an ayin, which is an eye. They had an open third eye, if you will, and they saw this. And if you compress it down without all the circles and lines and connections, you have a vertical line. That's the connection between out there and down here, which is what everybody was looking for. How do we connect to that which we can't even verbalize?
And if it's based on a reality, it makes
Yes.
sense that everybody would find it within their own culture, cultural exploration, or
Yes,
meditation.
and define it in their language, in
That's
the
right.
language of their
That's right.
culture.
Yeah.
Daniel, did you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's there's a teaching from the Tosha Rebbe, who lived in Montreal actually for many years, Alav Shalom, of blessed memory, and he said that the plan was for Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, and that they just couldn't hold it. It looked too good, and they just couldn't control themselves. So that was the mistake, was just a lack of just kind of control, or just waiting.
Discipline.
And discipline, just waiting. And not even that long. They were created Friday afternoon, I mean, or whatever Friday. Like but they went right to it. And so it's just a very interesting commentary that it's not that, like you said, Michael, like it's not that you it's not like you shouldn't eat from it. It just has to be within a context of holiness, or with a context of spirituality,
Of living and not knowing, the knowing of good and bad and And therefore, all of the dichotomies of our crazy world,
Yeah.
if they were looked at with the bigger picture of living on that level,
Yeah.
because our souls live on that level, but they couldn't wait.
It's
And as
interesting.
a
Yeah.
result, they went to the knowing before the living. And so our whole world runs on good and evil, the knowledge of good and evil, and how it's been distorted and horrifically presented to our planet.
True.
Let's go on with the poster. Over on the left, it's what's labeled B.
Yeah.
The notes say this shows the tree itself, Eight's Ayin Zadi final. Letter by letter, Eights can be understood as a great circle and a great spectrum. It is the gradient that extends from seed to tree to fruit. And Stan has used this image as the tree of Abraham in another paper, something that I animated. It's available on our video site, the Tree of Abraham video. But it's a real crux of the research. And then C, notice that both trees are in the midst of the garden. The tree of knowledge surrounds the tree of life. This shows us the identification of the blue vertical line with the tree of life and the red horizontal line with the tree of knowledge of good and evil, thus plus and minus. Tradition teaches that both the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil are in the midst of the garden. Here's the translation of Genesis 2:9, where the two trees are first introduced. And this is a translation by Rav Zlotowitz, as given in the Arskol Menorah Sefer Bereshit, Volume 1. And Hashem God caused to grow from the ground every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food, also a tree of life in the midst of the garden, and a tree of knowledge of good and bad. Explaining how two trees can be both in the midst of the garden, some commenters suggest that the two trees stand next to each other. Some commenters suggest that they are one above the other, and some suggest that they are coaxial. Our golden rule inverted T triangle suggests that both trees are in the midst of the garden. The green triangle in two separate ways, the tree of life stands vertically, connecting as above to so below, while the tree of knowledge of good and evil is centered on the base of the triangle shown. The vertical line, life, is unipolar and unidirectional, extending from the past to the present to the future. It is aspirational, inspirational, and transcendent. The horizontal line knowledge is a transactional, perspirational, based on hard work, and immanent. It coincides with and corresponds to the earth plane of existence. Whew, that's a lot of terminology there.
It's actually the last paragraph that you read is what I was trying to find earlier.
Okay.
Because that's a really good kind of way to think of this metaphor, this inverted T, sometimes inverted T triangle metaphor. It's a contrast of two interdependent elements of what affects our lives and how we perceive our lives as we progress through them. And then again, you can see, since these two aspects and ways of relating to time are interrelated, you can see how that answers the question of they're both being in the center of the garden, in the center of this ideal place for us to have been. They were central to it, both of them at once.
Well, they both need each other. This is, I mean, really just another way of describing Hashem Elohim, or the basic unity of God, really. This is, I mean, classic Hashem, Hashem and Elohim, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. I mean, this is the Shema. it's just it's a metaphor, a beautiful way of understanding like the text and textual analysis, using geometric metaphor as textual analysis, which is really special. But this is, I mean, this is so many things. This is absolutely classic Kabbalistic theory or doctrine. I mean, this is just, anyone who knows anything about Kabbalah would look at this and just say, yeah, sure. I mean, that's beautiful. It's beautiful the way he presents it, there's an interesting connection, being an ardent fan of the band Rush for many years. The last song that Neil Peart, alav shalom, wrote was called "The Garden," and the chorus is, "In the fullness of time, a garden to nurture and protect." And so it's like it's such a beautiful song. I can't really listen to it without crying. It's such a gorgeous song, and it's like it's just so amazing. You know what I mean? Like, so talk about a universe. I mean, he had a brilliant mind, but still, a universal kind of consciousness. Anyone who's on to that universal consciousness, whatever stream of life, eventually they're going to get to this concept. This is really a universal thing, and it's it's an ironic thing about life. Sometimes the very last things people do show something about the person that you couldn't have imagined. The fact that Neil Peart, who wrote just tremendously interesting and oftentimes secular or seemingly anti-religious songs in a very deep and interesting way, not always, but he wrote very interesting lyricists. At the end of his life, the last thing he wrote is a biblical commentary, and one that, interestingly enough, directly relates to this, or at least in my mind it does. But it seems like it does.
Yeah.
Anyway, interesting connection.
There's one other thing that we haven't talked about, and we probably should have prefaced this early in our discussions about looking at this work, because we are talking about the Torah or the Bible, and the tradition teaches that there are 4 levels of the Torah. And we all know this teaching, but it's important to point this out, that what exactly we're looking at here. And the 4 levels of the Torah are basically, Peshat is the first level, and that's pretty much where everybody's at in terms of reading the Bible, reading the translation. It's the story. It's pretty much what religion is based on in many cases, is just this one level of story. But the rabbis go a little deeper, and the next level is called a remez. It's it's called a hint. And it's basically that all commands of the Torah are hinted in the first word of the Torah. And so this is another level of teaching to the rabbis. And the next level is called drush, contextual and non-contextual moral philosophical explanations. This is where maybe Rashi comes into the fold in terms of his explanations. And then they come with the Sod. The Sod is what we're interested in. This is where we want to explore. And this is probably the basis for Kabbalah. Sod is a good word for it. We know we use the word in English as sod, the earth, the ground. But they call it hidden or secret. And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think what we're looking at here is the unlocking of the Sod level. It makes sense that it would be the technical level of the Torah, the non-bias, the structure. The Sefer Yetzirah is the Sod level of the Torah. And so this is what we're looking at here. We're looking at something that has not been taught. This level that it was called secret and hidden. And it was, you weren't allowed to teach certain elements of this level of Torah. And here we are, the 4 of us, just openly discussing it because Stan gave us this gift of the Sod level of Torah. And so it's because it's mathematical and technical, it's even difficult for us, the 4 of us, to give it, the meaning that it deserves. But I just wanted to throw that out. And we're going to keep plugging away at this because Yes, go ahead, Michael.
Um, Preceding what you were talking about, I never thought of it because you're pronouncing it sod, which in Hebrew would be sod. Sod means secret, but sod as the fundamental ground of it is kind of an interesting thing. And it never occurred to me. I would see it and I would read it as sod, even if I saw it in English. But the two words are one more of what Stan called those translingual puns that adds an insight to it. What I wanted to say was that what we're actually talking about here is, the higher you get, the fewer words you need. A symbol, a geometric metaphor will suffice. And those who get it. They say, Hamevin Yavin. Those who understand will understand. Those who don't will just see an upside down T. As you begin to explore it, but what if you took it and went the other way? What if you took this idea and put it into words? And the answer is you'd come out with the most famous Jewish prayer of all, the Shema. It says, Hashem Elokeinu, the two middle words. Hashem, as we think of God outside, above the source of that one line, and Elohim, the God as we perceive it in nature. It even has the same number value. Elohim has the same number value as the word Hateva, which is nature. At the end, it says Hashem Echad. Those two levels of God that you're trying to define is really one thing. It's all one thing, but you're limited as human beings and you have to kind of look at it in pieces to put it back together. But it starts with Shema. Very often the source is like the sun. He often talks about the sun and the shield, but the sun and the water world that we live in, Shin and Mem. That's the first two letters of the word Shema. And then there's when it's written in the Torah, a big giant ayin. That same word of Eitz in Eitz Chaim and Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. They both start with that inner eye. The picture of the ayin was the eye, as Stan pointed out here. If you are a God wrestler, that is a Yisrael, if you're somebody who is striving to get that level of knowledge, and you've opened up your inner eye as to how the Shin and the Mem world are connected, then you will get how God and his creation are connected. It's sort of the reverse of getting higher and higher and therefore simpler and simpler in language. In those 6 words, this whole story is told. And when we get that, then the rest is taking the good and evil and treating each other right. And the golden rule, that which is hateful to you, don't do it to anybody else. Because that's the first exposition of, okay, I've got the tree of life. I've got the tree of knowing the difference. What's the first thing I got to do? You got to treat each other right. Because that's the only way this is going to come alive in the world. Otherwise, you're going to have what we have now that we've had for thousands of years, which is chaos and war and inhumanity, man's inhumanity to man.
And that's
without
why
the tree of knowledge.
Yeah, and that's
the
why
tree of
the
life.
inverted T is so related to the golden rule. It was something that, this isn't something Stan realized from the beginning, this idea of the golden rule. We've talked a lot about this before. It kind of emerged, somewhere in the teens, the 20 teens. Well, I mean, there were references in the book, but he hadn't been talking about it. And then all of a sudden, and not all of a sudden, but it was kind of emerging in his thought process.
Surfaced.
It surfaced, that's right. It was probably there, but, and to me, it was like, what? The golden rule? I mean, one of the most basic principles, but he was talking about a different golden rule than we had been taught. But it's the underlying principle here, among many underlying principles.
Yeah, Michael, what you said about the Shema is Utterly appropriate and was really beautiful. There's another related poster that Stanley also did, which what is called, where are we here? It's called The Foundational Postulate, the Shema, a single principle experienced in two domains. And that is, golly, that is precisely what we've been talking about here. Let me see if I can get it up.
We'll make a program out of that poster.
Yeah,
After we finish with this one.
It's utterly related and deals with a different decantation of the same idea, which this was Stanley's foundational idea. It really was.
Yeah.
And almost everything that he discusses in great detail here, there, and everywhere, this idea of I keep on thinking the inverted T because I'm so used to it, but what it actually means was his perspective on everything. And so it's important for those of you who want to keep on exploring this material with us, just, hang on, hang in there, get, the idea will start to resonate. You'll start to be able to see how that interaction of these two ways of thinking, of process, how that works, and you'll start to see it in your own life. Just be patient, and just walk through all of the various different iterations of ways of looking at it with us, because I can tell you from experience, eventually the idea does kind of come to life within you, and you start to see this perspective from which he was looking at the world, at text, at pretty much everything. Yeah.
So we'll continue on to make it easier. Just think of the letter bait. Keep the letter bait in your mind and what that represents, as just a simple way of beginning that thought process of the duality that we keep talking about. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue this discussion next time. This is going to be part 1 on this poster, because obviously there's so much to talk about. And you can see how one thing opens up a lot of other things, and that's the nature of our discussion. Yes, go ahead.
I'd also recommend, if you want to take a look at the poster and the surrounding text, to actually go to the poster first. That's what I wound up doing this morning, and I realized that the text only makes sense after you've kind of dug through the poster first. Mm-hmm. And that makes sense in terms of the way Stanley worked, because the poster was how he thought. And the text was like, okay, we're going to publish a newsletter. You have to say something about each glyph more than the little notes that you have there. The text, the call outs, as we say in the text writing biz, they were the afterthought, and the diagrams and the little notes that he connects to each diagram, that was what he was really thinking.
And that's a great segue to just telling you again, if you want a copy of the poster and the notes, accompanying notes, just email to this address that I'm posting up on the screen, and I'll send it out to you. But for today, we're going to say thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.